No, this is just awkward as fuck, folks. Wait for it.
You're getting so clean. We're here today for the same purpose, to come together and say enough. To act. We must. Look.
She looks thrilled to be there, don't she? Thrilled. But, hey, can you blame her? No. Not at all.
To act. We must.
I'd be pissed too.
Look. I know progress can be slow and frustrating. And there is a concern that the reckoning on race-inspired, and there is a concern that the reckoning on race-inspired 2 years ago is beginning to fade. But acting today, we're showing that our dear friend, the late John Lewis, Congressman, wrote in his final words after his final march for justice in July of 2020. He said, "Democracy is not a state. It is an act. Democracy is not a state. It's an act, an affirmative act." And today we're acting. We're showing that speaking out matters, being engaged matters, and that the work of our time, healing the soul of this nation, is ongoing and unfinished and requires all of us never to give up.
Don't confuse democracy with Delaware, because that is an actual state and not an act. Actually, maybe it is. Who knows? At this fucking point.
Two summers ago, in the middle of the pandemic, we saw protests across the nation, the likes of which you hadn't seen since the 1960s. They unified people of every race and generation. Athletes and sports leagues boycotted.
Hell, wouldn't that be terrible if they unified people of every... But, what has he successfully done? Done away with that and tear it apart and, successfully bring us 40 years back to the past before we... Don't even get me started, folks.
And postponed games. Companies and workers proclaimed sports leagues, athletes and sports leagues of every race and generation. 1960s. They unified people of every race and generation. Athletes and sports leagues boycotted and postponed games. Companies and workers proclaimed Black Lives Matter. Students staged solidarity walkouts. From Europe to the Middle East to Asia to Australia, people saw their own fight for justice.
You see how fast he word salads it into a fucking brainwash to where you don't even know what the fuck he's talking about? Guys, if you don't actually know your history, you're gonna get fucking hoodwinked.
Justice and equality, what we were trying to do. The message is clear. Enough.
Is it really that clear? Or are you
Just enough. Look, almost a year later, almost a year later, a jury in Minnesota stepped up.
Dude, don't even fucking start with Minnesota right now. I will fucking personally come up there and punch you right in the balls.
And they found a police officer guilty of murdering George Floyd, with officers and even a police chief taking the stand to testify against misconduct of their colleagues. I don't know any good cop who likes a bad cop. But for many people, including many families here, such accountability is all too rare. That's why I promised as president I would do everything in my power to enact meaningful police reform that is real and lasting. That's why I called on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Fleecing Act. The Senate's in my desk.
Sorry, that was the dumbest thing I've ever fucking witnessed in my whole life.
I've never felt
My whole life. I'm sorry, sorry you had to witness that. Wow, just wow, rant over. If that saves one life, fucking mission accomplished. Be safe out there, it's gonna get fucking nautical.